Our first speaker this morning, we're running a little ahead of schedule, which is very rare for a conference, so that's something to celebrate. Life is about celebrating the small wins. We're going to do that a lot this weekend. Our first speaker is Dr. Michaela Musilova, and a fun fact is that she is the most likely to have the highest number of command missions for analog missions, as she has had over 30 in her career, which is a high number. So let's give her a round of applause. And welcome Dr. Michaela to the stage.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure where to stand where I can see you and I'm not blocking the screen. I'll try here. I'm short. Sorry about that. But thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. I've had the pleasure of being on cruise with several of you or working with you in different shapes and forms. So my talk today is a little bit about how I've been trying to explore different extreme environments around the world as part of my research as an astrobiologist. And that has, in a way, made me kind of be an extreme life form as well. So, you might know that these extreme life forms are called extremophiles. And I've been nicknamed that because I've traveled and done research on all 7 continents following these extreme life forms to understand what are the limits of life on Earth. And that can help us potentially find alien life forms elsewhere. But it also has benefits here on Earth by, for example, applying the knowledge in industry. A lot of extremophiles have been used in medicine and sciences, but also in technology. But also it helps us answer questions like, how did life form on Earth in the first place? And are we alone out there? And so I'll start with, let's see if this works. I don't have to point it in a special direction. Oh, there we go. Start with a little bit with my journey, how I got to this and how it's always been part of me to extreme environments and learn more about the world, but also about myself. So as many of you, I've been dreaming of going to space since I was a little girl. There's me in a little astronaut suit as an 8-year-old. But as someone from Slovakia, it's been essentially an impossible dream because to this day, people from my country have almost no possibility to go to space. That's because even though we recently became part of the European Space Agency as an associate member state, we are not putting a huge amount of money into ESA. And so our chances of being selected as astronauts are very minimal, and I was told that quite frankly. So even though now we're officially eligible, even if the next round of ESA astronaut selection in maybe 10 years' time, sadly, our chances are still not great. And when I started off as a kid dreaming about these things, Slovakia wasn't even considering joining ESA at the time. So I already knew from the start that it's quite a crazy dream to have, but I decided that, you know what? I think it's worth following your dream. If you're able to work on something that you're passionate about, your job is no longer a job, it's your hobby. And that's what big motivator for someone that went to space from Slovakia. His name is Ivan Bela, and that was part of I would say, an exchange program with the USSR, or well, Russia later, because they owed Slovakia some money, couldn't repay it, but they're like, hey, we can get a person from Slovakia to space, so that was kind of a good trade-off. And so anyway, he was able to go, I think, in 1999, and I had the chance to meet him as a kid. And first of all, it made me aware of, this is the perfect job because not only, I get to search for aliens, but I get to go to space as an astronaut to search for them. So I knew that that's what I wanted to do. But also it made me realize already at that age of 8 that there aren't many female astronauts out there. And like, what is up with that? And I think already at that age, I wanted to show that we women are also capable of doing things like that. And so that was my inspiration. However, I am from a family that of, I would say, more humble means. So until the age of 15, that remained like a little hobby passion of mine, but it was basically an impossible dream still because my family couldn't support me financially. I was bullied and mocked at school for having crazy dreams and just for being different in general. And so it wasn't until the age of 15 when I was actually inspired by a movie film from James Cameron called Aliens of the Deep. In that documentary, they go to the depths of oceans and they find these amazing creatures, extremophiles, that kind of look like aliens in many ways. And that kind of childhood dream, and I decided to pursue this dream alone without the financial support of my family because they just couldn't help me, or the knowledge base because neither of my parents were studied in the, I would say, natural sciences. And but it paid off. So it meant working my ass off as a teenager, and even at university level, I had multiple jobs. I got support from charities. I applied to every single scholarship I was eligible for, but it got me to University College London in the UK, where I studied. Oh, sorry, I'll go back to the previous slide if it. There we go. No. Where I studied planetary science. That's a combination of geology and astrophysics. At the time, you couldn't study astrobiology anywhere, so I had to create my own path. In my second year, thanks to my grades and effort, I was able to win a scholarship worth $50,000 to go to Caltech, and that's where I could finally add biology to the mix. Again, it's jumping, sorry. There we go. So that's me finally doing biology. And so it was kind of, a path that I had to create myself, but it was definitely worth it. And while I was at Caltech, I found out that at NASA JPL, sorry, there we go, someone was doing astrobiology research and looking at extreme life forms. I was like, okay, I have to find a way to work for this person. And I was able to get in touch with the little money that I had, kept on calling this person until he finally picked up the phone. And he was like, that's really great. And you have great ideas and you're very passionate, but foreign students can't work for NASA. That was just a rule at the time to do with visas. But I thought, oh no, I'm so close to doing something that I've always dreamt of. And only 6 years before I was 21 at the time, I set off on this journey. And so I insisted, and I thought, is there any way we could make this happen? I was able to eventually get a grant with this researcher to work as a visiting researcher at NASA and kind of bypass the system in a way. So there I was, very happy that this worked out and fulfilled part of my dream only a few years after deciding to go on this path alone. And at the time, they were preparing the Curiosity rover. And part of my research was to see whether we could potentially accidentally contaminate Mars with everything that we're sending there. Because even though people, will wear those protective suits in clean rooms and try their best, there's only a certain way we can clean these devices that we're sending to other planetary bodies, and we can't 100% clean them off. So it was more about what are the chances of us transmitting something to Mars, and will it survive? And unfortunately, I found that, yes, some of these extreme life forms on Earth, clean rooms like where we Curiosity rover, they could potentially survive the whole journey to Mars, potentially wake up and function on the surface. So that's kind of an irony for us astronauts. We're hoping to find life on Mars, but maybe we brought it there a very long time ago. And despite that not being very good news, I was allowed to put my signature into Curiosity as a reward for my work. And so that's now happily on Mars for some time. But after being there, I had to go back to Europe because of visa purposes. And I decided to focus on these extreme life forms, especially from very cold environments. Here you can see me in Greenland doing some research during my PhD. And again, there was the parallels of, could we find similar life forms perhaps on icy moons like Europa or elsewhere in the solar system and beyond? But one perk that working with these extremophiles can help us here on Earth in many ways. For example, during, I think, second, third year of my PhD in the UK to assemble the first British crew. I'm not, oh, okay, what's happening there? Can we go back, please? Okay, well, they kind of got a preview of my talk, but since we have a few extra minutes, hopefully this doesn't matter too much. Okay, so there we are. Nope, oh, one back, there we go. Maybe I'll just leave this here. Yeah. I'll just turn to you every time all right, so where was I? So I found out that these extremophiles that I was studying in Greenland on the previous slide, I'm not going to touch that, they are able to produce huge amounts of organic matter. And that's interesting from an environmental point of view, because organic matter on the surfaces of glaciers, that gets taken down to nearby ecosystem, and there are huge amounts of organisms just by of glaciers. Why couldn't we apply that to helping, how's the find the word in English, basically how to make soils more enriched. Could we add these extremophiles to places where we need to fertilize soils and make them better for harvesting things? And so that's the experiment I came up with when there was this call for the first British crew to go to Mars, or simulated Mars anyway. And though I'm not British, I decided to apply anyway because I was doing my PhD at the British University. And as it turns out, the first British crew to go on a simulated mission to Mars was actually mostly not British. I don't even know if there was a single person that was like a fully British person on our crew. That was my very first analog mission, actually with Kai here, and 10 years ago now, in February 2014. And that's how I got my foot in the door with analog missions. And so I was able to test my extremophiles, and I was able to find that indeed under certain circumstances, under Mars simulated conditions, extremophiles can produce a lot of organic matter. So it's interesting for us being able to live on Mars and grow something there in greenhouses. But sadly, with climate change, that's also important here on Earth, because we may need to have to find ways to be able to grow crops in places around the world where the conditions may change in an unfavorable manner. And so basically after this mission, since it went well, and you might be familiar, that's the MDRS station in Utah. That's where I did my first 2 analog missions. I was asked later to come back as commander of a mission that the International Space University. So that's me in the picture over there. And after my PhD, I was to do next. And next slide, please. And I had different options to even do a postdoc at NASA, but I need forward in terms of the space sector. And I decided to actually go back home and see if I could help with that. And a big part of it was there were some scientists that were doing some space research, but the public just wasn't aware of the potential of space. And especially the industry didn't know how they could get more involved in the space sector and profit from that. So I joined a team of young people. Most of us were under the age of 30. And we decided to build the first Slovak satellite. And that's there on the picture above my head, the little cube, or a close-up picture here on the top right. And this project was mostly to prove that we can do it. To do space research and build space technologies in Slovakia. That way we could prove that both to the government, but to the public as well, and hopefully convince our country to be more involved in the space sector. And it worked. We were able to send this satellite to space in 2017. It performed both different scientific, educational work, but also we developed a number of new technologies from which we got several spin-off companies. And now there are over 40 space technologies in Slovakia, thanks to this project. Thank you. And you would think that that would be a positive thing and people would be happy about that. Sadly, that wasn't really the case. We were young people that were changing things. I was the lead of this organization and a young woman in my 20s. Let's just say I wasn't met with a lot of praise from some people. And it's not the praise that I care about, but it's more some older professors maybe saw me as a threat. I don't know what it was. I can only hypothesize. And they started to spread all sorts of terrible rumors about me. And it started off with I never worked for NASA to all sorts of really mean and terrible things. In an effort to create more amicable relationships, I applied for grants with this group of researchers, hoping to build bridges. And if we work on a project together, hopefully we can work together better and not have people doing nasty things behind our backs. But sadly, as soon as we won the project, they started to blackmail me and they told me, oh, if I don't give up on this one position I was offered to be a professor at a Slovak university, they'll drop me out of the project. And it was the first time for me, well, A, to be blackmailed like that. And secondly, it was either be a professor, teach astrobiology in Slovakia, help move things forward, or, succumb to the pressures of people like this. And so I decided to forfeit the grant, and I didn't want to let myself be blackmailed. And actually, it turned out they stabbed themselves in the foot because once I was out of the grant, and I was one of the main people who helped us win the grant in the first place, the whole grant fell through, so no one got the money. So at least that was, I guess, one positive thing out of that in the end. But I was able to stay as professor. It was a really hard time because the negative stuff they were spreading about me all over the place was really hard to deal with. A couple of my colleagues actually collapsed and had to go to the hospital because of the pressures of that situation. And it was in the middle of all that I was selected for a NASA-funded mission at high seas. And I thought, okay, maybe this is a good time to take a break from all this stress. And maybe after that, I'll come back to Slovakia and see what happens next. And before I move on to the next slide, so here are just a couple of other examples of space technologies my colleagues are developing in Slovakia. So Sobor Butol rockets, stratospheric balloons, and many, many other space and satellite technologies. Next slide, please. So on the picture on the right is when I came to Hawaii for the first time to be part of what was meant to be an 8-month-long mission funded by NASA. And it was really hard for me to go because at that point I was a professor in Slovakia. I was CEO of a space company and the head of the space organization. So I was really guilty to come here or to come there and really struggled with that. But I knew that I also needed to do something for myself. I had gone home to help my country, but I also wanted to pursue my own dream. And by that point, I became a role model for a lot of young people. So I thought, okay, well, actually, this is probably a good thing for me to pursue my dream, help inspire them along the way, and I can still help my country even at a distance. And though this mission didn't go according to plan, that's a long story for another time. Feel free to catch me during this conference, or there's a very infamous The Atlantic article about that, so you can also Google that if you want later. So that mission unfortunately didn't go according to plan, but the silver lining was that I was offered the position of becoming director of High Seas, and that's where I ended up for a few years after that. And so that's just a picture of me. At that point, yeah, I had done about 30 missions as a commander at High Seas, both to the Moon and Mars, and I myself organized about 40 of them. Next slide, please. You're probably all familiar with High Seas, and if not, I know there's a talk this weekend about High Seas, so I won't spend much time over here, but just briefly, it's in Hawaii on the volcano Mauna Loa at approximately 2,500 meters in elevation, or 8,200 feet. That's us analog astronauts, the dome that I basically lived in for a while. And so next slide, please. Here are just a few kind of lessons learned from my time there. But before I move on, I just wanted to mention that despite ultimately staying away from Slovakia, I decided to still try and help my country as much as possible. So I brought different technologies like a rover, a lot of student projects to High Seas, and I continue to help different space companies in Slovakia to this day. And I actually found that it was easier to help Slovakia from abroad than to be there and have to deal with those nasty things, which were completely unnecessary. All right, next slide, please. Thank you. So what were the different things that we did at High Seas? My personal goal was actually to do things that are both beneficial for us here on Earth and for space exploration. So for example, we explored a lot of the lava tubes there. Not sure how much you can see this, but the ceiling of this lava tube that we're trying to climb through in this picture on the left is covered in different colors. Those are different microbes that can survive in extreme environments, my favorite extremophiles. And we were studying them both with NASA to see whether we could find similar things elsewhere in the universe, for example, on Mars and lava tubes that we think exist there. But again, to understand what the limits of life are here on Earth. We also explored the lava tubes on the picture on the right-hand side to see whether humans could live in lava tubes on the Moon or Mars in the future. And then we tested a variety of technologies like communication technologies and things that can serve us here, both to make our technologies better on Earth, but also with space applications. Then for me personally, outreach and education is extremely important. So I made sure to have different types of projects like that be part of every single one of my missions. An example on the top right, we filmed a short documentary during one of my missions called Space Drop. I'm not sure you can find it online, but I know it's still on Vimeo. So if you're interested, it's like a lighthearted, funny version of what an analog mission is like. I do recommend it. It was quite entertaining. And it came out during the pandemic. I think it was on Amazon as well. So it kind of helped make this parallel of being stuck in isolation and being on a mission. And on the picture on the bottom right, I know a few of you are familiar with what's going on there, but for those of you who are not, in my right hand, I'm holding hair, and in the left, I'm holding obscure dark liquid. Any ideas of what that could be? Feel free to shout out. You guys know the answer. What was that? Heard something else? I mean, you're not wrong in a way. The stuff in there has certain chemicals that are similar in that way. But basically, what I'm holding in my left hand is dissolved hair. And this is an idea that Slovakian high school students came up with, part of a competition that I've been organizing there for a few years called Mission to Mars. And the idea is for high school students to come up with experiments that I can then perform during my analog missions, and that way involve them in international research. And a lot of crew members kindly donated hair for this project. And actually, on one of my last missions, there was a funny moment where a crew member was looking around the lab at high seas and suddenly found this bag of hair, like, oh my God, what is this? Did you murder somebody in here? Like, no, that was all donated voluntarily, didn't force anyone. And so, yeah, by the end, I had like bags of hair that we dissolved. And the idea was to use hair as fertilizer. Since during long duration space missions, we're going to be growing hair and beards and all those things. Instead of just cutting or shaving it off, why not use it for something useful? So we dissolved it and we tried to grow different things on it. And I think Brandy here at the back of the room, she tested it in comparison to other fertilizers, and it actually worked really well. So it was really nice that a student project that actually performed so well, and we used it on many missions, and even Nat Geo filmed a short little documentary about that. So in this way, I've been trying to provide opportunities for young people around the world, not just from Slovakia, and not just to have them involved in space exploration, but to be able to pursue their passions and be imaginative. Next slide, please. Then another thing I was trying to teach my crews at high seas, and again, hair juice, classic part of this, was to be more sustainable. And, there's different ways you can run an analog, and, I know many of you are familiar with this, but my goal was to on purpose make it a little bit more challenging so that the crews could appreciate what we have on Earth more. And so, for example, on the picture on the left, that's how we did the dishes. It was a bucket system where you had the infamous yuck bucket was the one on the very back where things were just soaking and stuff was floating around. It wasn't very nice to work with, hence the yuck name. The middle bucket is where you kind of clean the dishes with detergent, and the front one is where you just rinse it off quickly and put it to dry. And we would essentially use that all day, every day for 6 people, and only change 1 bucket a day approximately. So then eventually you get rid of the yuck bucket and you shift everything one way, switch things around. And that was a great way to preserve water when doing dishes. Then in terms of preserving water, we also used the red bucket you see in there. And we didn't even use the entire bucket for showering. It was essentially just that container in there. And maybe we filled it to about 1/3, and the crew was allowed to use that once during their 2-week stay at high seas. And we would have probably been able to take more showers than that, but again, it was my way of trying to teach them to appreciate water, which we have so much of here on Earth, but in many places, actually, people don't have access to water. And so just to open the crew members' eyes a little bit to those realities, and maybe when they came back from missions, I was hoping they would be a bit more careful with how they use resources. That also applied to food, so the freeze-dried food we had during our missions, and we eventually were able to grow food during our missions as well in this kind of hydroponic tree system. And again, just to teach the crews to be able to manage their resources better, appreciate what they have, but also study the nutrition of what they need, their bodies need. And then, yeah, we had things like the hair experiment to mix things up a little bit. Next slide, please. And then finally, I'll stick to a little bit the lessons learned from the human side of these missions. And so there's a lot of things to say with 30 missions under my belt. So these are just kind of the main key points. Empathy was an extremely important thing. You can be a really skilled person, engineer, scientist, and so on, but if you can't work well with your crew and try to understand how they feel and be able to solve situations with empathy, the missions are simply not going to be as successful as they can be. And this is kind of like, I would say, a counter example of that. So in this experiment, I don't know if you're familiar with it, we're wearing these so-called mood sweaters. They're made by the company Sensory. I think it was developed originally for people with autism or some kind of mental health issue that they were trying to help with. And you're wearing a sensor in the palm of your hand that's meant to detect how you're feeling. And then it transmits that in the information to the sweater, and the sweater changes color based on how you're feeling. So for example, in this picture here, we're all standing on a little towel. You may be familiar with that exercise from some team building events and things like that. So you're all standing on a small towel, and you have to turn the towel over while you're still standing on it. That's why we're doing all these acrobatic moves there, trying to do that. And you can see all our sweaters are blue because we're really focused on this task while we're trying not to fall down because the floor is lava sort of thing, which literally it was actually. Then we had another activity here on the bottom left where we're doing something like speed dating on the moon, but we're not dating, we're just getting to know each other. So we're talking to each other, asking questions. And you see we're comfortable, all our mood sweaters are purple, we're having a good time getting to know each other. And then we were asked to do a task that not everyone was happy about. I'm not gonna reveal what color means what for this picture on the top left, but I'll let you figure out that some people were not super happy about doing this exercise, and you could clearly tell, not just from their faces, but from the mood sweater. And so the idea behind this experiment was to see whether we need that, whether we need to have a label on our forehead saying, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm happy, whatever, or whether we can just simply learn to communicate better and tell each other what we need instead of having to have it out there like that. And so while this helped in some ways, and it's definitely very useful to people who really need to be able to have some assistance in showing their emotions, for the rest of us, just really need to learn to communicate, not just amongst us and being polite and all that, but communicate how we feel on the inside and tell the others, I'm sorry, I'm having a bad day. I'm gonna be a bit grumpy today. It's not you, it's just me. I just need some alone time, or maybe I need a hug today because I'm not feeling well, that sort of thing. So one important thing that I took away from my missions, thank you. Another thing is how very important diversity is. I found that the more diverse the crew, in terms of ethnicity, gender, religion, you name it, the more diverse, the more we got to know each other and the more we bonded in different ways. And my goal as a commander was always to make us be more of a space family rather than just a group of professionals trying to get for a mission together. So here are just some examples of different cultural things that we exchange. For example, top left was my first Thanksgiving on the moon. And we didn't have a turkey. That was actually someone baked a turkey in the, baked bread in the shape of a turkey. So that's how we improvised that one. Christmas, of course, some other fun activities. And the diversity didn't always only help us bond, but we were also able to solve problems better because we all had slightly different points of views. And so when there was a difficult situation, we could kind of brainstorm better rather than all of us having similar training and therefore also coming up with similar solutions. Next slide, please. And finally, creativity was very important, and that kind of goes hand in hand with the diversity as well, because I try to have diverse crews, not only in terms of where they came from and their background, but also in terms of what their expertise was. I always tried to have an artist, a journalist, an educator, someone that was different from the team be part of the crew. And this is just an example. We had a photographer, Cassandra Koss, who also designed the Celine patch, which we then had for several of our missions. And so she just came up with this patch, and then it turned out that one of the lava tubes had a very similar shape. So we kind of reenacted that, and that became part actually of a front cover article of the Smithsonian in 2021, I think. And so in this way, she was able to share with the public what we do on analog missions, and create I would say, a connection there with other people about what we do, but also the creativity helped us work better as a team. Again, we found different solutions to problems because we had someone who was thinking out of the box from the rest of us. Okay, next slide, please. And though I no longer work at High Seas, I left a couple of years ago, I still can't escape analog missions. So here, actually last year, I was the commander of a crew with a para-astronaut, the lady standing next to me. You can see we're all holding one of her legs. She has different legs for different sports that she does. And the goal of the mission was to make the space sector be more inclusive for people with disabilities, but also to prepare us for events in the future when someone may get hurt during a mission. We'll have to work with someone who has some kind of disability. And next slide, please. And finally, I'll just tell you briefly about the project I'm currently working on called Astro 7 Summits. I'll be frank, one of the reasons I decided to pursue my own project is because, unfortunately, in academia, industry, and even in the NGO sector, I dealt with a lot of use and abuse as a woman, as a foreigner. And so I just decided it's better just to do something on my own. So I set up my own nonprofit here in the US called Extreme Frontiers. Actually, Brandy is one of the officers of that nonprofit. I have one in Slovakia too, and decided to pursue something that connected all my passions, both love for life in extreme environments and space. So the goal of this project is to climb the tallest mountain on each continent while doing my extremophile research in collaboration with NASA, but also doing a lot of educational and outreach projects to involve young people from around the world in what I do. So here are just some examples. For example, me on Kilimanjaro. Next slide, please. These are the different mountains that I'm planning on climbing. So we did Kilimanjaro, Aconcagua. Now I literally flew in from Alaska yesterday and I'm flying back on Sunday to do Denali, the tallest mountain in North America. And then here are the other ones that I'm be pursuing over time. Next slide, please. That's me on Aconcagua last year doing research. If you could click, please. And that's, for example, doing some research of what life forms can survive in these interesting ice formations on Aconcagua. Next slide. And that's just a flag we have for my project. It's also displayed on the table over there. Next slide, please. Then a big part of my research is also to spread awareness about climate change. So for example, that's me and my team on the summit of Kilimanjaro in 2022. This is my father on Kilimanjaro in 1995. Notice how much more snow and ice there is on the summit compared to now. And based on my research and that of many others around the world, it looks like in about 10 years, there will be no ice on Kilimanjaro. And that will have a huge impact on the entire ecosystem, but also on all the communities that live near Kilimanjaro, because they're going to lose a huge source of drinking water. So again, back to value of water here on Earth. So that's just an example. Next slide, please. And I do a lot of work in education outreach around the world. Here are just some examples going to schools. Next slide. During different events. And I think the next picture is just, another community event that I like to do. Next slide. And I also film documentaries during each of the expeditions. This is the one from Kilimanjaro. I'm still figuring out how to have that shown more widely around the world. It's premiered in a couple places in the US and in Europe, and maybe with the help of some of you, if you have ideas, I'd love to find a way to share that with more people here. And finally, this wouldn't be possible without the help of many partners, sponsors, donations from individuals and charities. Here are just some examples. Next slide, please. And if you would like to help out in any way, I'm actually selling these patches that you can see on my jacket in the back. This is meant to be like a honeycomb structure at the end when I have all 8 of the patches. They're kindly designed by Tim Gagnon, who you might know has designed a lot of patches for NASA and many other people. Great guy, he kindly did that as part of my project. And so very briefly, there's a story there. So this is the overall project patch, which shows me as an aspiring Slovakian astronaut. And then each expedition has its own patch. And during each expedition, I'm slowly evolving to become more like this astronaut with all the lessons I'm learning along the way. Then each expedition patch is special to the country that the expedition took place in, even like the night sky is depicted the way we would see it during the expeditions, and other nice little details like that. So if you'd like to support my project, you can also buy some of these patches. I have them over there, and I'll be there during the break shortly if you'd like to come talk to me. But there's other ways we could collaborate through research or educational projects. So please come and talk to me. I'm also looking for volunteers. I would love any help with this project. So thank you very much. And finally, these are just my contact details if you'd like to get in touch. I also left some of my business cards and other details on the table over there. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
We do have some time for questions. So if anyone has questions, I'll come around with the mic. Anyone gonna be brave? Yes.
How did you get to be so awesome? Are you kidding me? Holy smokes. No. How many people in the world have you inspired with everything that you've accomplished?
Thank you. It's very kind of you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, like, do students reach out to you all the time and say, how do I do what you've done?
Essentially, yeah, it's, when I first started off, it was doing something for me, but in a way, because I knew as Slovakians, we have so little opportunities. I was trying to do something for my country, and I was trying to do something for women because I felt like they were underrepresented. But it was always kind of like this inside thing inside of me. And then when I was 21, I came back from working at NASA. I came back to London, and I had these other students come up to me going, "Oh, how did you do all this? And oh, I hope that by the time I'm your age," and they were like a year younger, "I can be a third of an astrobiologist like you." And I was like, "What? What are we talking about?" And that really opened my eyes that I did something different and that I can inspire other people who are basically my age. And that's when things completely shifted for me. And I started to focus a huge amount on outreach and educational work. And then when those times got really hard, like I mentioned, when I was in Slovakia and all sorts of terrible things were happening, it was these young people especially that were my inspiration. I would get messages from them all the time saying how I inspire them or how they're interested in Mars thanks to me or whatever. And whenever things got hard, I would just look at a picture from one of them or one of their notes or something, and that helped me get through everything. So nowadays I do it mostly for them, but of course I have my own passions and things, but I just see that it has such a greater meaning than just pursuing my own passion. Thank you.
Okay, as another biologist, I have a very geeky question. Did you use the yuck bucket to fertilize the things you were growing?
It was considered as an option. Actually, we also, as a little side story, we had a dehumidifier in the hab because of the dome system, you get a lot of moisture accumulating. And one crew member was really ambitious and he was like, I'm gonna, recycle this and use it as a shower. Well, let's just say it didn't go so well. I think because the dehumidifier hadn't been properly cleaned for a while and he had all sorts of fungi growing on his face after that one instance. So it was really bad. So I was like, okay, let's not try experiments of this type. So though there were suggestions along those lines, I was like, until we find a way to like filter these things and make sure they're clean and there's nothing bad in there, let's just stay on the safe side. It's after all an isolated small dome,
So in your journey to be an astronaut and go to space, how do you see what would be your position on the crew of like commercial space flights now that it's not just up to governments?
I mean, if I'm so lucky and I'm able to go on such a flight, honestly, I just want to be useful, and that's why I always hope to be an astronaut on a longer duration mission where I could actually do research that could benefit humanity long term. But if I'm only able to go on a short one, at least, I'll still be very grateful. If I could be a scientist or someone that can do something useful for the crew, or maybe my knowledge from all these expeditions could help with some of the team cohesion side of things, or whatever it is, I would just love to be useful and get that cool experience.
Thank you. This is very inspiring as always, Michaela.
Thank you.
First question, I have like several questions. First question, did the book that you write ever come out in English? Second question, you hosted two all at High Seas. I'm curious, how did you see that dynamic kind of shift in terms of being all female crews? And I know you acknowledge diversity being important. How would you compare those experiences?
I remember all the questions.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe
Okay, let's
pause
start
there and I will.
Okay.
Thank you. So yes, I wrote a book about my life called A Woman from Mars in Slovakia. I was approached by a publisher who kindly wanted to share my story. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to get it into English yet, simply because essentially like my project Astro 7 Summits is mostly a one-woman show, and I do everything from the fundraising, social media research, the rest of it, the training for the expeditions. So I've had to put that on hold, but it is like super high on my to-do list. I'm really hopeful that in some near future, I'll be able to translate it. But I want to basically rewrite it into something more international because the Slovak book is more oriented on people from Slovakia, but definitely work in progress. And your second question, it was always interesting to have a different type of crew. So for example, I was on a crew where I was the only female and the rest were guys, or there was a crew where there was one man and the rest were female, and then we had the two all-female crews. There was always a lot to learn from all those experiences, and I can't say, one was better than the other, or I would say they each had something beneficial that was different from each other. So the all-female crews, I really like that we were able to share a lot of things like really early on. So we could just sit down and chat and explore things. And it wasn't just, chit chat, oh, we're having a good time. It was more, we really got to know each other in depth really well, which I found helped us later in the mission when we had to deal with some issues. Or for example, during one of those missions, the elections were happening in the US. And I think having that empathy and connection helped us get through that, even though there were different opinions on the crew about how that should turn out. So I really like that aspect. Whereas, for example, the more male-dominated crews, they were much more practical, less about this kind of heart-to-heart stuff. But they went and found it in a different way, maybe later in the mission. But then, they had they were just really practical, and I really enjoyed that, where we just got things done quickly in a different type of way. So that's why I found when the crews were more mixed, you got the best of both worlds. It was all kind of, I got the practical and the more empathetic, and I think both sides learned from each other. And I met, for example, male crew members who had been on missions with female leaders, and they learned a lot from that, and they were applying that in their leadership, which is really awesome, and I was really happy about that. Okay, other questions?
One more. Can you tell us a little bit more about your training? How are you getting ready for all these climbs?
Yeah, thank you. Briefly put, it's challenging. People ask me what's the most challenging part. I actually say it's the fundraising. That's really, really tough. I really hate asking people for money, but it's kind of part of my job these days. But apart from that, yeah. So for example, for Denali, I've been training with an 80-pound backpack, so it's about 37 kilograms. And I just go up and down stairs for hours doing that, or on very long hikes. I also have to drag a sled during this expedition. So I literally had a 200-pound guy put on something slippery under his shoes, tied him, and I would just drag him around the room with it. So, whatever I can, and with a low budget, that's what I can do. If I had a bigger budget, I would go to a gym and go to like an anoxic chamber or something. And instead I do breathing exercises where I hyperventilate and I try and reduce the amount of oxygen in my body, and that helps me prepare for the higher elevations of the mountain. So I do what I can with the means I have, and so far it's been working. So fingers crossed it will continue to pay off. And of course, lots of hiking and training, getting the skills. I also did a few mountaineering courses to learn how to escape out of a crevasse if I were to fall in one, and rescue other people if necessary.
Any more questions?
Sorry to ask another question.
Oh,
So
no.
when you do your expeditions, how many people do you have with you as your support team? And do you have a medic with you when you're on your team?
Thank you for the question. So originally I was hoping to have a bigger team, but because these are so financially challenging, the expeditions and the fundraising has been a big challenge. At the moment, in a way, it's basically just me. And not that I'm going out alone, but in terms of doing this research, I'm the only person in a team. So for example, for Denali, I'm joining like a pre-existing team that's planning on climbing Denali. But I'm the only one who's going to be like tied on a rope, like, sorry guys, a really cool extremophile over here. Let me just grab it, while being roped up. So not ideal, but again, do what you can do under the circumstances. But for example, for Kilimanjaro and Aconcagua, my partner was able to join me. And so also an analog astronaut and also co-founder of Extreme Frontiers, Cameron Crow. I think, Mike, you might know him. So that was great because I had an assistant in the field, whereas for these more expensive expeditions, I have to do everything myself. But the guides, for example, they're trained medically, so they should be able to take care of us. But I myself have a lot of medical training from all those missions and other experiences. So hopefully between the few of us, we'll be okay. But I wish I could have more people, because it would make it so much easier to be able to collect the samples I need and do all the outreach and educational activities like filming the documentaries before at least my partner Cameron, he could film and all that. Whereas now it's gonna have to be like selfie style and put it on a tripod and try to do stuff. So a whole new experience for me.
We have time for one more question. Anyone else? All right, I have a question. To say to other young women or anyone who might be experiencing discrimination, or the experience you went through, what are some of the tools that really helped you get through, and what advice would you have for them in navigating that complexity?
It was definitely really hard. And one of the things that they try and make you feel, the bullies and other people out there, and I'll call them bullies because whether it's children in school or older people, that's essentially what they're doing, is trying to bully you. They try to make you feel isolated. They want to make you feel guilty and alone and different and bad or whatever it is. And so just really remember that there are other people in your life. You have friends, family, reach out to people. Don't let yourself be isolated. Number one, because I didn't know that before, and it was really hard. And if it wasn't for I can't really talk about this much or I'll get very emotional, but let's say one math teacher, maybe I wouldn't be here today. So it's really important to find that support. The more, the better. Don't keep it inside, really talk to people. And actually what helped me get through the dark times when I was in Slovakia was a good friend of mine that told me, Michaela, just don't worry about these people. Keep doing what you do, keep succeeding, and that's the best way to prove them wrong. And that's essentially what happened. And 3 days later, I got invitation from NASA to go to Hawaii, you know, and I was like, okay, maybe this will work. And so keep believing in yourself, have that support network, and really, yeah, don't care about those others. They don't see you for who you are, and it's not worth even wasting your time and energy on them. Thank you.